Before we begin, the Bridgeburners were considered traitors to the state of Tennessee in 1861. Tennessee had sided with the Southern Confederate States against the wishes of eastern Tennessee and other parts of the state. Slavery was not an important part of East Tennessee economy, and the highlands of the area were stubbornly holding on to the Union side of the Civil War. The area did not approve of the predominantly Democratic Southern legislature and had been at odds with the state over their laws for many years. The Bridgeburners were acting on behalf of the federal forces of the United States. We will show that these men did not always have a choice about what they did. Some of the men were under the penalty of death, whether or not they burned the railroad bridges down or not. Come along with us as we travel back in time and look at the Bridgeburners of the Civil War. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine. Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Eastern Tennessee has had enough. As we have stated, the people of Eastern Tennessee were not happy about the predominantly Democratic Southern legislature. There was a statewide vote about whether or not to join the Confederacy. Tennessee as a whole voted to go with the Confederacy. However, the eastern side of the state voted 2-1 to stay with the Union. But because the vote went with the rebel states, the legislature decided to move with the Confederacy. That meant that all residents who supported the Union within their border was now deemed a traitor. This would not go unanswered. At the Greenville session of the East Tennessee Convention, June 17th through the 20th, 1861, the Union leaders of the community petitioned East Tennessee to break off as a separate state of the Union. At first, the state of Tennessee turned a blind eye where the Union people were concerned. But this would all change when the Union people began to fight back, beginning with this convention. As a response for the petition to be removed from the state, Governor Isham Harris ordered General Felix K. Zollicoffer and his Confederate troops into East Tennessee to enforce the will of the state. The meeting at Camp Dick Robinson. In July 1861, Confederate politician and East Tennessee native Landon Carter Hayes warned the state legislature that the railroad lines in East Tennessee were now vulnerable to attacks. These lines were vital to both war efforts in the South as they carried the needed supplies to the soldiers. Hayes warned that he was, quote, looking to hear that the bridges had been burned and that East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad torn up, unquote. Taking a cue from Haynes' warning, and due to the rejection of the Greenville petition, Reverend William Blount Carter, along with other East Tennessee Unionists, fled to Kentucky. The group met at Camp Dick Robinson, Kentucky, to enlist with the Union. Carter met with Generals George H. Thomas and William T. Sherman, and a naval officer who became a general in the Union Army, Samuel P. Carter, Reverend Carter's brother, to discuss his plan. After some discussions, the plan was agreed upon by the group. Carter then went to Washington, D.C. to discuss it with President Abraham Lincoln. The plan. This was part of a larger plan to destroy the Southern infrastructure and their ability to make war against the Union. The plan was approved by President Lincoln and was to be executed in November 1861. In all, the plan called for the Bridgeburners to destroy 9 railroad bridges in southwestern Virginia and East Tennessee. These bridges extended from the bridge over the Holston River at what is now Bluff City, the Watauga River at Carter's Depot, the bridge over Lick Creek, the bridge over Holston at Strawberry Plains, the bridge over Tennessee River at Loudon, the bridge over Hiawassee River at Charleston, 2 bridges over the Chickamauga Creek in the vicinity of Chattanooga, and the bridge over the Tennessee River at Bridgeport, Alabama. Each of these bridges were a railroad bridge and would have disabled the East Tennessee and Virginia, or the East Tennessee and Georgia lines, as well as the Western and Atlantic line. With the planned invasion of the Union Army, President Lincoln pledged the Bridgeburners to have compensation in the amount of $2,500 and protection from the Confederate Army. General William T. Sherman was to head the force that was to invade Tennessee. Preparation for invasion. By mid-October of 1861, Reverend Carter set up a command post in Kingston, Tennessee. Kingston is the county seat of Roane County, about 36 miles southwest of Knoxville. Carter would give each bridge or set of bridges to a commander to oversee the operation. Captain David Fry was tasked with burning the Lick Creek Bridge. Captain William Cross was tasked with the burning of Loudon Bridge. A special note: Cross's role in the bridge burning has not officially been verified. Alfred Cate was tasked with burning bridges in southeast Tennessee. Daniel Stover, who was the son-in-law of Andrew Johnson, was tasked with the burning of the bridges in northeast Tennessee. Sevier County Sheriff William C. Pickens was tasked with the Strawberry Plains Bridge. Each of these commanders were then tasked to recruit reliable men to assist in the destruction of the bridges. For the second stage of the invasion, Union forces at Camp Dick Robinson were prepared to march south to Knoxville. Carter recruited several conspirators for the march. The bridges were then to be burned on November 8, 1861, to clear the way for Sherman to march into Tennessee. How the plan fell apart before it began. General Felix K. Zollicofter and his Confederate troops led a raid into Kentucky. This raid failed. However, it did change the timing of the planned invasion. There were also several Confederate skirmishes going on in western part of Kentucky. Afraid that he did not have enough men, Sherman arrived at Crab Orchard, Kentucky on October 31, 1861. There he received Adam Thomas, who begged Sherman to go ahead with the plan immediately. Not convinced it would work, Sherman pulled out of the plan on November 7, 1861. Unaware of the cancellation. November 7, 1861, Jacob Harmon, Jr. held a meeting on his farm of other Union supporters. The group of men enlisted with the Union Company F and the 2nd Tennessee Volunteers on the morning of November 8, 1861. The other men in attendance were Christopher Alexander Hunn, Matthew Henshaw, Henry Harmon, and Harrison Self. Hahn was a skilled craftsman in pottery, and his art is highly valued to this day, as it is considered the best produced during the mid-19th century in Tennessee. These men were not aware that Sherman had called off the invasion and were prepared to go ahead with the plan that was given to them. It is not clear if these men volunteered or were coerced into doing this task. As we will see later on, there are reports that the men felt that they had no choice in this matter. November 8, 1861. With all of the people moving into position, some of the bridges would be easily burned, while others would remain standing. This is how the night went. Two of the bridges, the Chickamauga Creek and the Hiawassee, were not guarded very well. Cate and his men accomplished their task pretty easily. The bridges at Bridgeport, Loudon, and Watauga were heavily guarded by the Confederate troops, and all attempts had to be abandoned. The Lick Creek and Union bridges were guarded by only 1 or 2 sentries, and they were pretty easily overpowered by the men. The men at Lick Creek had captured the sentries, and after they burned down the Lick Creek Bridge, they released their captives. This action may have led to their arrest later on. At the Strawberry Plains Bridge, there was only one Confederate guard named James Keeling or Keelan. Keeling saw one of the men named William Pickens light a torch and immediately attacked the man. Both men were badly wounded from the fight, with Keeling escaping into the night. However, Pickens had dropped and lost the matches in the melee, and so the plan had to be abandoned. Cries for vengeance. Only 5 of the 9 bridges were destroyed, which led to the increased security on the railroad bridges. But this action led to the Confederate leaders of the East Tennessee to go into a wild panic. There were exaggerated reports of an uprising and attacks in East Tennessee, which were unfounded. General Zollicofter rounded up known Unionists in the region and arrested and jailed them on the spot. Judah Benjamin, the Confederate States Secretary of War, proclaimed that any captured Bridgeburners were to be, quote, tried and summarily by drumhead court-martial, and if found guilty, executed on the spot by hanging in the vicinity of the burned bridges, unquote. Benjamin also stated, quote, all such that have not been engaged are to be treated as prisoners of war, unquote, and were to be transported and to be held. 5 Unionists were soon arrested. Confederate officials ordered the execution of 4 of the 5 men, as Harrison's self escaped execution by the pardon of President Jefferson Davis. Christopher Alexander Hahn, Matt Henshaw, Henry Harmon, father, and Jacob Harmon, Jr., son, were executed. Others were captured in the raids for the bridge burnings. They were Samuel Pickens, father of William Pickens, Dr. Robert H. Hodson, Edmund and William Hodges, William Hunt, John M. Fleming, former editor of the Knoxville Register newspaper, Montgomery Thornburg, James Meek, Samuel Johnson, and Levi Truett. Confederate Judge West H. Humphreys threw out many of the cases, stating lack of evidence. This was reported by the newspapers. According to the December 17, 1861 Memphis Daily Appeal, quote, court-martial. The general court-martial convened in this city some days since by Brigadier General Carroll for the trial of the Bridgeburners still continues in its session. There are idle rumors afloat of its actions in 2 or 3 cases, but inasmuch as the proceedings of the court are known only to the defendants and their counsel, these rumors may be pronounced without foundation. We may remark, however, that this court acted promptly, and there is no complaint of the law's delay in the proceedings, unquote. While these men were not convicted for the bridge burning, they were still held as prisoners of war and sent to prison in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. While there, several of the men would die, including Samuel Pickens, Montgomery Thornburg, and Levi Truett. A total of over 150 persons would be tried and convicted for conspiracy or inciting other acts of violence against the state of Tennessee. The 4 executed conspirators would actually throw into question whether or not they acted of free will in the matter. Their defense was a very interesting one, even though it was not accounted for, and the men would die regardless. According to the Nashville Union, an American newspaper, quote, secret Union organization in East Tennessee. Lieutenant Flynn, just from Knoxville, communicates to us some interesting intelligence. It has been ascertained that a secret, sworn organization of Union traitors exists in East Tennessee, which is extended throughout that section. It is doubtless similar to that which has been discovered in northern Arkansas. Some of the bridge burners who have been hung signified before their execution to burn the bridges under penalty of death. They said that they were doomed to die by the hands of their associates if they refused to perform their task, to which they were assigned by lot, and therefore, having fully made up their minds to suffer the death penalty, were indifferent to their fate. Memphis Avalanche, December 17th, unquote. We will let you decide if they acted on account that they were forced to do so against their will, or if they wanted to help free East Tennessee from the rest of the state. We do find it interesting that this is the second time in history that East Tennessee wanted to break off from the remainder of the state. The first time was when it wanted to establish the state of Franklin in 1784. Military impact. Each of the 5 bridges that were burned down were quickly rebuilt. Because of this, there was very little military impact from the missing bridges. But because of the actions of the bridge burners, the Confederate state of Tennessee began to view their Union-leading residents with a very harsh eye. In many areas, martial law was instituted, with many of the people of the area being arrested and jailed. These actions caused President Abraham Lincoln to send Union troops to occupy East Tennessee. General Sherman would invade the state of Tennessee just a few months later at the Battle of Shiloh, April 1862. Thank you. We at Kentucky Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Civil War battles. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell notification button. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries in Appalachian history.